All right, everybody, get ready, because today we're diving deep into the history of cannabis.
Yeah, it's a really long history too, and pretty controversial.
Oh, absolutely. And you know what's crazy? We're going to be using a YouTube video to guide us on this deep dive.
Oh, why?
Yeah, it's called When Did People Start Smoking Weed?
I've seen that one. It's a good one.
It's so fascinating. I mean, who knew that the very first U.S. president was actually a hemp farmer?
Seriously?
Yeah, George Washington.
Huh. Well, I guess back then they didn't see cannabis the same way that we do today.
Exactly. For most of history, it was seen as this valuable resource, a medicine even.
That's right.
Okay, so let's go way back to the beginning. The video starts off talking about this Chinese emperor named Shen Nong.
Oh.
He lived around 2700 BC.
Oh, wow.
And apparently he documented cannabis's medicinal uses in a book called Pen Sao Ching.
Pen Sao Ching, yeah. That sounds familiar.
Yeah, it suggests that cannabis was already a well-established crop in China back then.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense.
Probably used for all sorts of things too, like textiles, fiber, even food and medicine.
So basically like the ancient duct tape of plants.
Ha! Exactly. So how did this knowledge even spread beyond China?
Well, I mean, think about the Silk Road, that ancient trading route that connected the East and the West.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
It's no coincidence that as cannabis traveled along those paths, its cultivation and use spread across continents.
Wow. It makes you think about how interconnected the world already was even back then.
Right.
So the Silk Road was spreading goods ideas and apparently cannabis, too.
It really makes you think. And actually, speaking of spreading cannabis, there's this archaeological site high in the Pamir Mountains called the Jirzhankul Cemetery.
Okay, what's the story there?
Well, they found tombs there dating back to 500 BC. And guess what they found alongside the bodies?
No way. They found cannabis.
They found wooden burners with traces of cannabis in them.
You're kidding?
Nope. Researchers think that mourners inhaled the smoke during the burial rituals.
So they were getting high with the dead. That's crazy.
I know, right? It's the oldest evidence we have of humans smoking cannabis.
Makes you wonder what it all meant to them, spiritually.
Well, some experts think they used cannabis to communicate with the spirit world or to help them grieve.
Wow.
That's wild.
It is.
And what's even crazier is that the strain they found there was high in THC.
So they knew about the psychoactive effects even back then.
Seems like it. And they might have even been cultivating specific strains for different effects.
Wow, the ancient stoners were ahead of their time, huh?
They might have been. But the Jirzhankul Cemetery wasn't the only place where cannabis was linked to ancient rituals.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The video also talks about the Scythians, this nomadic tribe known for their interesting bathing habits.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
So around 440 BC, this Greek historian Herodotus described the Scythians making these weed saunas. They would basically hotbox these tents, filling them with hot rocks and cannabis fumes.
So the OG hotbox?
Right. And according to Herodotus, they howled with pleasure.
Yeah. That's amazing. It seems like no matter what time period we're talking about, cannabis has always been a part of social gatherings.
And rituals and altered states of consciousness for sure. And it wasn't just limited to these ancient civilizations either.
Oh, yeah. Like who?
Well, like in India, for example, they have bang, this cannabis preparation that's been used for centuries.
I've heard of bang. Isn't that popular during some of those Hindu festivals?
Yeah, particularly in rituals associated with the god Shiva and during celebrations like Holi and Mahashivratri.
That's right. They even have like a weed milkshake, right?
They do.
Yeah.
It just goes to show you how cannabis is still a big part of cultural and religious practices around the world today.
It's fascinating how one plant can mean so many different things to so many different people.
Absolutely. And this is even clearer when you look at when cannabis came over to the West.
Yeah, it showed up in the Americas in the 1600s, right?
Yeah.
As hemp.
Yep. Mostly used for agriculture.
And get this, George Washington, the first president of the U.S., he grew hemp on his plantation.
No kidding.
Yeah, at Mount Vernon.
So the founding fathers were a little more 420 friendly than we thought, huh?
Maybe so. But hemp was a huge deal back then. It was used for everything from textiles and rope to even shipbuilding.
It really was like the ultimate sustainable resource.
It was. But it wasn't just an industrial crop either. It even made its way into Western medicine.
Oh, that's right. Thanks to this guy named Dr. William Brooke O'Shaughnessy.
Now, wasn't he the one who traveled to India to study cannabis?
He did in 1833. He spent years researching the medical benefits of cannabis there. He was really fascinated by how they used it in traditional Indian medicine.
So he was like a pioneer in bringing those ideas to the West.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
O'Shaughnessy was convinced that cannabis had all this untapped potential for treating a bunch of different illnesses.
Interesting. What did he use it for?
All sorts of things. He used it to treat patients with rheumatism, cholera, you name it. And you know what? He was successful.
Wow. So his research actually helped legitimize cannabis as a medicine.
It did. And because of that, it was even added to the United States Pharmacopoeia in 1850.
That's a pretty big deal. So cannabis was officially recognized as a legitimate medicine.
It was. And you know what else is interesting? While he was doing his research, O'Shaughnessy came across this new strain of cannabis,
Oh, what was it called?
cannabis indica, or ganja.
I've definitely heard of that one. What's so special about it?
Well, it originated in India, and it was known for having some pretty unique effects. It was more relaxing than sativa, and people said the high was more delirious too.
So while sativa was more energizing and uplifting, indica was more of a chill experience.
Exactly.
So they were already figuring out all the different ways you could use cannabis.
They were. But even with all this progress and acceptance, there was this shift happening. A shift that would eventually lead to cannabis's downfall.
Oh no, what happened?
Well, while cannabis was having its moment in the sun, anti-cannabis sentiment was growing in other parts of the world.
Oh really? I had no idea.
Yeah, and get this, the very first anti-cannabis law dates back to 1378.
1378. Wow, I never would have guessed it went back that far.
It does. The emir of the Jonima in Arabia, a guy named Sudun Sheikhuni, he banned the smoking of hashish in his domain.
That was just the beginning though, right?
Yeah, over the next few centuries, all these different rulers and governments started restricting or banning cannabis, even though it was becoming more popular as a medicine.
So even as Western medicine was embracing cannabis, other forces were trying to demonize it.
It was a real tug-of-war between acceptance and prohibition.
And that conflict would eventually lead to some pretty big changes in the United States.
You got that right.
Yeah.
A series of laws completely changed the fate of cannabis in America.
This is where things start to get messy, right?
It did get really messy. The beginning of the 20th century in the U.S. saw all these laws passed that really laid the foundation for cannabis's downfall.
Wasn't there something called the Harrison Narcotics Act back then?
You got it. That was 1914.
Yeah.
And that law was all about controlling the opium trade.
Oh, right. It required prescriptions for things like opioids, right?
Yep. And manufacturers and distributors had to register with the U.S. Treasury Department.
So even though it wasn't directly about cannabis, it signaled that the government was starting to crack down on all sorts of substances.
For sure. And pretty soon after that, a bunch of drugs were totally outlawed, like morphine, cocaine, heroin, you name it.
So it's like they were saying these are good and these are bad, even if there wasn't much science to back it up.
Yeah. And then came Prohibition in 1919 with the Volstead Act.
Prohibition. That was when they banned alcohol, right?
Yep, that's the one. And even though it didn't say anything specific about cannabis, the whole climate around Prohibition created this perfect storm for cannabis to get swept up in it.
How so?
Well, suddenly all these substances that used to be easy to get were restricted. And that led to a bunch of problems like addiction-related crimes, black markets, and a ton of misinformation about substances in general.
So cannabis was basically guilty by association.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And to make matters worse, a few years later, this crazy movie came out called Reefer Madness.
Oh man, Reefer Madness. I've heard of that one. It's like a cult classic now, right?
It is. It's so bad. It's good. You know, for anyone listening who hasn't seen it, it's this total exploitation film that makes all these wild claims about cannabis.
That's what kind of claims?
Oh, they said it makes people violent, insane, even murderous. Total nonsense, of course.
Yeah.
But that's how they tried to scare people away from it.
Wow. Talk about propaganda. But Reefer Madness wasn't the only thing that turned people against cannabis, was it?
No. In 1937, this guy, Harry Anslinger, he was the head of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics. He published this article called Marijuana Assassin of Youth.
Oh, wow. That title is intense.
Yeah, it was basically more fear-mongering. And it worked, because a few months later, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed.
And that was basically the end of legal cannabis in the U.S., wasn't it?
Pretty much. I mean, the Marijuana Tax Act didn't actually make cannabis illegal, but it made it super hard to get and use it legally.
Because of the taxes.
Yep. There were all these taxes and regulations on selling, possessing, transporting cannabis. You could get hit with huge fines or even go to jail if you didn't follow the rules.
So it basically forced cannabis underground.
Exactly. And that's when things really started to change. People stopped using cannabis recreationally, almost completely. Hemp was still okay for some things, and there were a few medical uses, but the plant's reputation was shot.
It's sad how something with such a long history of helping people could be demonized like that.
It is. It really shows you how quickly things can change and how politics and public opinion can ignore science and common sense.
So what happened next? We've gone from ancient origins to the West, and now cannabis is basically outlawed in the U.S. Where do we go from here?
Well, even though prohibition was in full swing, some people kept researching cannabis. In 1964, there was this huge discovery that changed everything.
Really? What was it?
This Israeli chemist, Raphael Mechoulam, he finally figured out how to isolate THC.
THC. So
Right.
he discovered the part of cannabis that gets you high.
Exactly. It was a huge deal for scientists because for the first time, they could actually study the effects of cannabis on the brain in a controlled way.
Wow. So they could isolate the specific compounds in cannabis and see what each one did.
Yep. And that's not all the piece. Mechoulam also figured out the structure of CBD.
CBD. So
Yep.
that's the part that doesn't get you high, right?
Right. And it's turned out to have a ton of potential medical benefits.
It seems like this was a turning point for cannabis research.
It was. But while all that was going on, there was another revolution happening, a cultural one. And once again, cannabis was right in the middle of it.
You're talking about the 60s, right? The counterculture movement.
That's the one. It was all about peace, love, and challenging the status quo. And cannabis became a symbol of that rebellion.
So the hippies adopted cannabis as their own.
They did.
Yeah.
And events like the Summer of Love in San Francisco in 1967 really cemented that connection.
It's amazing how cannabis could be a subject of scientific research and a cultural phenomenon at the same time.
It is. And unfortunately, the link between cannabis and the counterculture would end up causing some problems because it attracted the attention of people in power who were already suspicious of cannabis.
This sounds like things are about to get bad again.
They are, because this is when President Richard Nixon comes into the picture.
Nixon.
Oh, boy. Yeah.
Yep. In 1971, he declared the war on drugs. He called narcotics public enemy number one.
I remember learning about that in school, but wasn't there more to it than just protecting public health?
There was. A lot of people think Nixon used the war on drugs as a way to go after his political enemies, especially the anti-war movement and black communities.
So it was really about politics and control.
That's what a lot of historians believe, and that's how we ended up with the Controlled Substances Act in 1970.
The Controlled Substances Act, that's what made cannabis a Schedule I drug, right?
Yep, they put it in the same category as heroin and LSD.
That's crazy. Cannabis and heroin are not even remotely comparable.
I know. It was a purely political move. It had nothing to do with science. And because of that decision, pretty much all research into cannabis stopped.
So all that potential for medical breakthroughs was just thrown away because of politics.
It's a real shame. And things only got worse when Ronald Reagan became president in the 1980s. The war on drugs was ramped up even more. I remember Nancy Reagan's Just Say No campaign and those DARE programs. They were everywhere when I was a kid.
Yeah, those were all part of Reagan's war on drugs.
Yeah.
And they definitely had an impact. They scared a lot of people and helped solidify the idea that cannabis was dangerous.
It's incredible how much those campaigns shaped public opinion. But thankfully, people eventually started to question those narratives and demand real change.
They did. And one of the first signs of that change came in 1996 in California.
That's when they passed Proposition 215, right, the Compassionate Use Act.
That's it. That was a huge moment for medical cannabis in the U.S.
It was the beginning of a whole new era.
Exactly. Proposition 215 made it legal for patients with certain medical conditions to use cannabis, and it gave other states a model to follow.
And a lot of states did follow suit. It seems like every year there's another state legalizing medical cannabis.
It's been amazing to watch this movement grow. And it's not just in the U.S. either. All around the world, countries are starting to realize the potential of medical cannabis and creating their own programs.
The YouTube video mentioned a bunch of them: Canada, the Netherlands, Austria, Uruguay, Italy. It seems like the whole world is waking up to the benefits of cannabis.
It really does. And at the same time, we're seeing cannabis become more accepted in pop culture, too. Think about all the stoner comedies that came out.
Movies like Harold and Kumar and Pineapple Express, they definitely helped change the way people viewed cannabis.
For sure. And then there's someone like Snoop Dogg. He's been a huge advocate for cannabis.
Especially after the way the war on drugs targeted black communities, his voice has been so important.
Absolutely. He's challenged the stereotypes around cannabis and shown that it can be a part of a successful life. It's proof that pop culture can really make a difference.
So we've got medical cannabis, growing pop culture, embracing cannabis, and people like Snoop Dogg speaking out. What happens next in this story?
Well, the next big step was the legalization of recreational cannabis. And that movement really took off in the early 2010s.
And it all started with Uruguay, right? They were the first country to full legalize cannabis in 2012.
It was a bold move that really shook things up.
Yeah.
And it paved the way for other countries to consider doing the same.
But let's not forget about Colorado and Washington. They were the first states in the U.S. to legalize recreational cannabis.
Those were huge victories. They showed that full legalization was possible and that people actually wanted it.
And a ton of other states have followed their lead. It's pretty amazing to think about how far we've come.
It is. Just a few decades ago, cannabis was this demonized drug with no recognized medical value. And now millions of Americans can use it legally.
It shows you what can happen when people fight for what they believe in.
And even at the federal level, we're starting to see some progress. President Biden recently pardoned people with federal offenses for simple possession of cannabis.
That's a huge step in the right direction. It seems like things are finally starting to change at the top.
They are.
Yeah.
But we still have a long way to go. Cannabis is still federally illegal. And that creates a lot of confusion and challenges for businesses, financial institutions, and individuals.
It's almost like we're living in two different worlds. One where cannabis is becoming mainstream, and another where it's still treated like a dangerous drug.
It is a strange situation.
Yeah.
But the push for federal legalization is getting stronger. I think it's only a matter of time before cannabis is rescheduled and regulated like alcohol or tobacco.
That would be incredible. So with everything we've learned, where do you see things heading in the future?
That's a great question. And honestly, I don't have a crystal ball. But what I do know is that we're in the middle of a massive shift in how people think about cannabis.
I agree. It's no longer this taboo subject that people are afraid to talk about. It's part of our everyday conversations, our news, and even our healthcare.
Exactly. And with this new openness comes a ton of new research and innovation. Scientists can finally study the potential benefits of cannabis without all the restrictions of prohibition.
It's like we're rediscovering this ancient plant, but this time we're doing it with a lot more knowledge and a better understanding of its complexities.
Wow, what a wild ride, right? From ancient emperors and hotbox saunas to reefer madness and now legalization. It's crazy to think about how far we've come.
It is. It really makes you wonder what's next.
That's the big question, isn't it? Where do we go from here? I mean, you're the expert. What do you think?
Honestly, it's hard to say. The future's always uncertain. But what I find really exciting is how much our perception of cannabis has already changed.
Oh, yeah, for sure. It's not this taboo topic anymore. Everyone's talking about it.
That's right. It's in the news. It's at the forefront of so many industries, and it's even changing the way we think about healthcare.
It really is. And with all this new openness and acceptance, there's just so much potential for research and innovation. I mean, scientists can finally study cannabis without all those restrictions that came with prohibition.
It's like we're getting to know this plant all over again. But this time, we have better tools and a deeper understanding of how it works. Absolutely. We're starting to unlock all these secrets about cannabinoids, terpenes, and all the other compounds in cannabis, and we're learning how they can be used to treat so many different conditions.
It's incredible to think about all the possibilities. But of course, it's important to remember that cannabis isn't some kind of miracle cure.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's still a substance that needs to be used responsibly.
Exactly. We have to educate ourselves about the potential risks and side effects. And we need to make informed decisions about whether cannabis is right for us.
And if it is, we need to learn how to use it safely and effectively.
I completely agree. And that's why responsible regulation is so important. We need to make sure that consumers have access to safe, high-quality products. Products that have been properly cultivated, tested, labeled, and all that.
And we also can't forget about all the harm that was caused by the war on drugs, especially to communities of color.
You're absolutely right. We need to address those systemic inequities and make sure that the people who are most affected by prohibition have a chance to benefit from legalization.
Yeah, things like expungement programs, business opportunities, community investment initiatives, that kind of stuff.
Exactly. It's about creating a cannabis industry that's fair and equitable for everyone.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the history of cannabis, I think the main takeaway is that we're just getting started.
I agree. The future of cannabis is full of possibilities.
There's still so much to learn and so much work to do to make sure that cannabis is used responsibly and ethically.
And it's up to all of us to shape that future.
So to everyone listening, thank you for joining us on this journey. It's been a blast exploring the history of this amazing plant.
And we hope you'll continue to explore it with us.
Who knows what incredible discoveries are still waiting to be made. Until next time, happy exploring.